I really learned that, the limitations on students are not real. They're whether they're self-imposed or imposed by the prejudice of a teacher, maybe known or unknown, they're illusory. And they're really it's the biggest disservice we can do as a teacher is to assume a limitation, and a lack of access doesn't need to be a kind of period at the end of a sentence.
Hi, you're listening to Conversations with Musicians with Leah Roseman, which I hope inspires you through the personal stories of a fascinating diversity of musical guests. Katherine Dowling is a brilliant Canadian pianist, and in this conversation we talked about her album of solo music by Alice Ping-Yi Ho, mentors including Gil Kalish and Henk Guittart, and how and why she's developed her exceptional musical memory. Katherine shared fantastic insights into teaching and learning, the importance of inclusivity and access to arts education, and how she uses the Pomodoro technique in the practice room. She explained how sound production on the piano is about the speed of attack, and we discussed different skill sets and career paths for pianists. Dr. Dowling shared many inspiring musical memories and how she developed her ambitious Elegy project to follow her personal path through grief. You'll be hearing some clips from the album Awake and Dreaming, which you'll find linked in the show notes, and you can use the timestamps to navigate the episode. Like all my episodes, you can watch this on my YouTube channel or listen to the podcast on all the podcast platforms, and I've also linked the transcript to my website, leahroseman.com. It's a joy to bring these inspiring episodes to you every week, and I do all the many jobs of research, production, and publicity. Have a look at the description of this episode where you'll find all the links, including different ways to support this podcast and other episodes that may interest you. Hi, Katherine. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Hi, Leah. Really, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have this wonderful, relatively new album, and you've done many collaborative albums, but it's your first solo piano album.
That's right. Yeah.
So I just happened to run into your friend Amy Hillis at a rehearsal this week, and she told me that she introduced you to the music of Alice Ping-Yi Ho.
She did, and I'm hugely indebted to her for that. I played for Amy. Well, we've known each other since childhood, but I was playing for her for the Eckhardt-Gramatté National Music Competition in 2018, and she had this really beautiful program, really trying to represent the whole country, people from different parts of the country, people from different backgrounds. And one of the works was a gorgeous violin piano piece, Coeur à Coeur, by Alice Ho. And I had heard her name. I mean, she's very prolific, but I had never actually played any of her music and discovered it that way. And what was really amazing was then Amy won the competition, so we got to tour the program, including Alice's piece, for her whole tour. And because Amy, as you may know, is a very meticulous person, she arranged for us to work with the composers leading up to the competition, so we would really have that inside scoop, so to speak, on each of the works. So then I got to meet Alice personally and work with her on that piece, and that really got my real love for her as a person and for her music going.
Now, most people listening aren't Canadian, so they won't know about this competition. Do you want to just speak to that because you mentioned it?
Oh, sure. So this is a competition. I believe it's the 48th year this year. It's for Canadian young artists, and it's focused on music since 1950 and music that is by Canadian composers. So I believe the programs have to be 50% Canadian works and 100% works since about 1950. And it cycles, so every year it is either for pianists, string players, or vocalists. And the prize is, I think, what makes it really special, in addition to the repertoire. But the prize is actually a concert tour across the country. So the young artist not only receives a cash prize, but they also have this opportunity to share their program much more broadly, to interact with audiences, and to have a really wonderful tour experience. And I'm super privileged to have been on that tour twice, in 2015 with violinist Joshua Peters, who's now a member of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, and then in 2018 with Amy Hillis, who you mentioned, a Toronto-based violinist. And I was actually just finished up being on the jury for the preliminary round of this year's piano competition. So it's a really great organization.
What's your experience being on juries? I'm curious, what your feelings about competitions in general.
Oh, what a question, right? I mean, I'll say in the most ideal sense, a competition is an opportunity for striving together, which I believe is the root word of the term competition, though a linguist can check me on that, where artists, whether young artists, professionals, children, are really in pursuit of this higher goal of improving their artistry and communicating something. At worst, though, of course, I think they take away everything beautiful about the art form, and they reduce it to just a kind of comparative cheap thrills approach. And I think we get both extremes and then everywhere in between, certainly in the pianistic world. Um, One kind of competitive form, though, that I have had really wonderful experiences with is the regional music festival system, where I've adjudicated extensively. And to go to a town of maybe 300 people, and the whole town shuts down during the music festival, so everyone can come and listen to these young players share in performance what they've been working on all year, and to have feedback from an adjudicator and to have the support of their community. That would be probably the most ideal and probably the least kind of competition-y example of that. But yeah, I think all musicians, we have pretty mixed opinions of
Yeah.
competitions.
It's interesting you said that about the regional music festivals, because my experience in Ottawa as a teacher, very few people participate for a size of the
Okay.
city.
Hmm.
Very few people go to listen.
Mm,
So maybe it used to be different, but that's kind of disappointing. It's kind of devolved.
sure, sure. That's so interesting. Yeah, I think I'm from Saskatchewan,
Mhm.
and the music festival is it's a mainstay of life, and so many aspects of public life in Saskatchewan have kind of gone by the wayside in the information age, and of course with, you don't need to go to the local hardware store anymore. You can drive to the city or order on Amazon. But one aspect of public life that does seem to still be very strong is the music festival system. Um, and also maybe on the prairies, because there are not great concert halls and young artist academies, maybe that music festival system has really filled a role in a
Mhm.
way that keeps people, teachers as well as community members, engaged.
I've noticed it has become more inclusive of different styles of music. There's traditional Chinese instruments now,
Hmm.
and so, yeah, it's interesting.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
should keep supporting that. Well, let's get back to your album.
Sure.
So the title, I want to get this right, Awake and Dreaming,
Hmm.
is not one of the titles of the compositions.
That's right. I found coming up with the title to be extremely challenging. But I landed on this with Alice's approval. There's something about all of her music, not only the pieces I played on this album, but all of her works, that to me they make me incredibly present. That awakeness. Um, I have to be not only pianistically like very very present because it's highly virtuosic, but the sound world is really striking. It's arresting, and yet at the same time there's something very otherworldly about her sound world, about her expression, her musical language. So I wanted to kind of capture somehow in words that tension and that duality, um, that I really do feel everywhere. And there's also a kind of surrealist nature to a lot of her music, and something about that presence of awakeness and also that otherworldliness of dreaming seem to come together nicely. I also There's a children's book by Kit Pearson when I was a girl called Awake and Dreaming, and it's about time travel. So
Oh,
that was very evocative to me as well. It's not, the album has nothing to do with the book other than that. Both, I suppose, are part of my artistic journey.
that's really interesting. Now, she's a pianist as well as a composer. So how did that affect you as an interpreter?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think we certainly had, between the two of us, a really direct way of relating to the music. Certainly, I could speak with her about her intended effects sonically, like how she envisioned those being achieved physically. So to have that commonality between us was very helpful in exploring with Alice how I might interpret her music. Her notation made a lot of sense to me, both idiomatically as well as intellectually. But also, I hate the term the canon because what does it really even mean? But so many of the kind of luminaries of the pianistic canon were composers as well as performers. So all of my training, when Mozart, even Bach, even pre-piano, this keyboard player who composes, has really been the lineage upon which all pianists stand. And so when I think about how might I contribute in my very small, humble way in my small corner of the world, how might I contribute to broadening the canon, expanding it? A pianist composer is super attractive to me because I really feel um, whether it's globally recognized or not in the profession. An artist like Alice, who brings that performer interpreter experience into her compositional language, like that's to me that's the same as I say Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Debussy, Ligeti, right up until Alice.
Hmm.
So
I think it's on your website. You have this quote, exploring beauty that isn't nice or pretty.
yes, that's I think pretty foundational to the music that I'm drawn to. Not only music, I mean, all forms of art, I feel, of course, everyone likes things that are pretty. I have nothing against that, and I love it too. But there's such a world of expression beyond that. There's such a wealth of beauty that isn't pretty and smooth and easy, that is more arresting or more challenging, requires engagement in different parts of ourselves. And certainly, I love to hear music, hear a sound. Oh, I've never heard that before, right? And what's smooth and pretty tends to have the opposite effect on me. It's more familiar and soothing. A lot of the art that I'm drawn to, music and other art, I find very beautiful, but not very pretty
Hmm.
necessarily.
Now, I've listened to this album many times, and I'm an experienced classical musician, but still, it's difficult music. It took
Hmm.
several listenings. So for people that are going to hear now some short excerpts, and of course the album's going to be directly linked in the show notes, how can we present this to the audience? Well, let's talk with what I wanted to include first. I think one of my favorite pieces is There's No Other Night Without a Dawning,
Mm-hmm.
which was also part of this Elegy project. So maybe, do you want to get into that?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, I love that that's a piece you were drawn to. This piece was a commission of mine, written specifically for me and for this album. And it's based on a very beautiful poem by Helen Steiner Rice, an American poet. I won't recite the poem because it always makes me cry. Pretty tearjerker. Um, but it's about the process of loss and grief and ultimately the dawn that always follows every nightfall or every dark experience. So when I was dreaming up this project, it was in 2021, summer and fall, and I was in the process of trying to get a grant and trying to choose which of Alice's pieces I would learn. And just in those really early dreaming stages. And I reached out to Alice because, of course, most importantly, I wanted her blessing before I pursued any of this. And she was so kind and so supportive. And she said, if you pursue this project, I will write a new piece for you, to be a special part of it. And then she asked me if there was any kind of theme or any kind of ideas that I was thinking about with respect to the project. And I said, well, there wasn't really, but I was working on this other project that you mentioned, my Elegy project, around that time. And I said it would be really interesting and special to have an elegy from you because that's such a huge part of my artistic life at the moment. And she was excited by that. And in fact, it kind of sparked her curiosity to start working on a requiem, which she is working on now. But the Elegy project, just to tell you a little bit about that, that started during COVID, when I think so many of us musicians, artists were kind of searching for our way when we had, all our work collapse. And we were trying to find these ways not only to connect with listening communities, but also to stimulate our own creativity, our own creative drive. And we had a really dark time in my family. My sister-in-law passed away very suddenly in early 2021. And because of COVID restrictions, we were not able to mourn her as we would in other times. And then within about 6 months, my father-in-law passed away from COVID. So a big part of my grieving process personally was playing elegies, works of mourning at the piano. And I spent hours and hours doing that every day. And it kind of came to be part of a recital tour that I did following the end of, I won't say the end of COVID because we know it's not over, but the end of restrictions. And that was quite a powerful experience for me to connect with listeners because everyone goes through grief, right? It's one of the kind of hallmarks of the human experience. And it was an incredibly potent and fresh time for grief during those months and years. So Alice's work, There Is No Night Without a Dawning, is an integral part of that program. I learned 100 elegies or more, but every program that I do is a slightly different combination, but Alice's work is always right in there because um, it does go into um, the depths of a kind of morning experience. It's quite dark in terms of its expression, but ultimately through the work towards its conclusion, there is a sense of hope. Well, maybe I shouldn't say hope, but certainly of dawning, of change just being constant and of the grief process changing. So that work's always in there. And um, as you say, the music is quite thorny, quite difficult, but I think sometimes having a poem, for example, and a little bit of backstory for a piece, such as what I've shared just now, that can offer a weight, and I hope it can anyway.
Thank you for that. You're about to hear an excerpt from There Is No Night Without a Dawning, from the album Awake and Dreaming. You mentioned you learned 100 elegies.
Yes.
I know that you memorize all your
Hmm.
solo music,
Hmm.
and it's really astounding to me. I don't
Yeah.
understand that kind of memory, and I'm curious about your process and the way you digest music.
Sure, yeah. It is certainly not something I ever set out to do and say, "Oh, I'm going to be someone who memorizes everything." The first, most obvious reason for it and how it informs my process is that I have quite poor vision, and I don't feel like I can trust my eyes. Um, in addition to that, I'm not a strong reader. I think as far as all musicians go, I'm probably not bad, but compared to some pianists, I'm not on the stronger side of readers because that wasn't a big part of my training until relatively late. So I got used to depending on my memory more than on vision. Um, and part of that is because I was trained in the Suzuki program to completion. So I think I was about 12 when I finished the sixth Suzuki book. And by then we're into Bach partitas, Beethoven sonatas. And I was doing that exclusively in the Suzuki system, so by ear. And I always have to give a bit of defense to that method in that in Japan, where the method originates, children learn to read music at school. So it's not that the method doesn't believe reading is important, but in Saskatchewan public school, we did not learn how to read music. So I was really dependent on my memory and on my ears as a way of learning music from the very beginning. So with that kind of imprinted as how I learn music, I think that's a big part of, how this came to be, how I approach it. Um, and as I play a lot of more contemporary music, also the scores I find, I don't want to say illegible, it's just that they're so intricate and so highly notated that there's simply no way that with my not ideal vision, my not ideal reading skills, there would just be no way for me to do it were it not memorized. And so as I learn a piece of music, um, I just am memorizing from the very beginning, memorizing my gesture once I find what it needs to be, um, hearing the sound in my head and having that memorized, and then whatever gesture is
Mm.
required to realize that. So it's probably a slower learning process than somebody's learning process who is a strong reader. But it's just kind of how my way of learning music has evolved. I'm so blown away by so many of my pianist colleagues who can, take an orchestral score and play it right away, like a lot of pianists who work as vocal coaches, for example. But yeah, my particular skill set lends itself much better to that memory work.
Hmm. So, do you have perfect pitch?
I do.
Okay. So you're able to hear chords when you look at a
Mhm.
score?
Not
Okay.
right away necessarily, but um, that's part of the work that I
Okay.
do in my practicing.
I think I'd read somewhere that you'd done some investigation. I mean, not your own research necessarily into the way we learn music, like from a neuroscience perspective.
Yeah, and that's not in any kind of academic way. It's
Mm-hmm.
more just as a fan
Yeah.
of I find well, it was sparked by actually a pianist who had her name's Christine McLevy. I haven't seen her in years, but she did her master's at Juilliard in piano and then went on to do a PhD at Stanford in neuroscience. And at the time, we were colleagues at the Banff Center in their long-term residency program, which no longer exists. And she said, this is the most creative thing out there was neuro research that, you know, she was obviously a very brilliant intellect, and of anything she was aware of, and of anything she could think of, neuro research was the most creative. Like it was just totally at the cutting edge of human understanding. And that really sparked my curiosity. So Daniel Kahneman, the writer, that's someone whose work I've really enjoyed exploring. And I kind of got myself in a position where I had to keep learning more because I was teaching a pedagogy course at the university where I was teaching, and I really wanted, if I was going to be sharing like how we teach, or I really had to know how we learn, and I didn't. So it really sparked a lot of curiosity, and really I'm just such a fan of that branch of human study. I think it's really incredible.
Yeah. There's so many directions this could go in. I was curious about pedagogy. You
Mhm.
touched on Suzuki, and a lot of many of my colleagues teach in the Suzuki method, and they're
Sure,
very
sure.
devoted. I did have that was my first start, but I got away from it. And then as a teacher, I've many students have come to me as
Mhm.
teenagers who were in the Suzuki method and just that really could barely read music
Mhm.
and weren't exposed to other styles of music. That's what really got me. It was a very narrow
Mhm. Mhm.
because he developed this repertoire a long time ago, and I know a lot of teachers expand beyond that and they have that flexibility. But just my experience was this was not the
Mhm.
experience of the students, and especially it's so important to expose I shouldn't say children, all students to music of now, of contemporary
Mhm.
music.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that that's such a big part of my career, and my first, 6 years at the instrument was the opposite. And I think as teachers, we really do our students a disservice if we're a kind of fundamentalist about any method, right?
Yeah.
Because there's never going to be a perfect method for any student, much less for all of them. And certainly, I would not take a didactic approach and apply Suzuki method to a beginner student. That being said, a lot of strengths that I got from that training are the ears, and that's so easy to neglect in pianist training.
Yeah.
So many young pianists now, they won't even have an acoustic piano at home. It'll be a digital instrument. And so right from the very beginning, that aspect of the training isn't there. And then what in 10 years are we going to expect them to hear colors and hear overtones when that, has just never been part of it. So I think in terms of a young pianist, like that is a great strength of the method is you're opening up the ears and making them a priority from the very beginning. But certainly for the reasons you mentioned, and I'm sure many others as well, it can be really restrictive too. And I was absolutely one of those teenagers. I'm not, maybe I was 12 or 13, preteen, and I went to my next teacher, and the poor woman, like I couldn't really read, and she was super patient. And other things too, like I hadn't learned technique apart from repertoire. That was another huge curve. Um, but yeah, she was really incredible to work with me through that. So yeah, there definitely are limitations.
It's interesting what you were just touching on in terms of the electronic keyboards that a lot of people are using now and the overtones. I'd never thought about that, but of course.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you never have your piano in tune, that's not really going to be part of your experience. But yeah, the spectrum of sound is so narrow on a keyboard. And I mean, if you can only afford a keyboard, or if you live in an apartment with neighbors and you have to practice over headphones, I mean, I see so many reasons why it's
Mhm.
the right choice for some families. But in terms of the oral development, like AURL development, it I think it's pretty tough. And also the touch, like feeling the escapement, the point of sound. Obviously, you can't do that even on a. They try to mimic it with
Mhm.
some higher end keyboards, but it's just a completely different experience.
Okay. You mentioned your Banff residencies,
Hmm,
and I believe there you met Henk Guittart.
I did, yes. I met him. So he's a violist and conductor, founder of the Schoenberg Ensemble and Schoenberg String Quartet, a Dutch musician. I met him first there in 2006, which feels like such a long time ago, and I suppose it was. He was there as in the capacity of a mentor faculty, and I was very inexperienced, and he was so incredibly encouraging and inspiring. I had many coachings with him, and then in 2007, so that was in the fall, and then in the winter, he was back in that capacity to the center, and we got to play together. He programmed to play a duo work with me, and ever since then, he's like a fairy godfather for me. Not only in that he's given me so many opportunities, but he's really been a foundational part of me finding my sound and finding my aesthetic and exploring the repertoire.
And you are part of one of his ensembles in the Netherlands.
Yeah, Grupo Montebello, which has been on hiatus for a bit now, but it was it is, I suppose, dedicated to all of Arnold Schoenberg's arrangements that he made for his Society for Private Musical Performance, which um, not only with the public vitriol he experienced for his music, he also lived in a time of extreme anti-Semitism, and any critique now that I see of his music from his time, you can also see it's very, very colored by prejudice. So he founded a society where none of the public was not welcome because the critics were not welcome. Assaults on his person were not welcome. And it was a safe space to not only explore his own music, but also works by Debussy and Bruckner and other contemporaries, Zemlinsky, who now we think of as, well, surely everyone would love that, right? But of course, we're very controversial in their time as well. And so he made these arrangements. They had very little money. He couldn't have a whole symphony to play Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, but he could make an arrangement for a chamber ensemble. So Grupo Montebello recorded and performed all of those arrangements, as well as many of the chamber works of Schoenberg himself and also Alban Berg, Anton Weber, and other contemporaries. So it was a really special project to brought together musicians from all over the world.
And I believe the Elegy project we were speaking of earlier, you also brought that to the Netherlands last year?
I did, yes. I had a version of it. And The Hague, a colleague of mine, her name is Ellen Corver. I think she's probably objectively the best pianist I've ever heard. And I've heard so many amazing pianists, but she's just a really incredible artist. She has a new concert hall and series in The Hague. And it was a really great experience to bring a program there. It was works of Alice and also of Henri Dutilleux, French composer, and of Rudolf Escher, a Dutch composer. So these kind of works that were written towards the end of the Second World War. And so it's really also this sense of dawning following great destruction and creativity as a response to destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious, getting to know the Netherlands music scene a little bit. Like how their ecosystem is a little different than Canada, let's say. I mean, I've had some discussions with people there, and I have an artist's daughter who lives there. She's based in Rotterdam.
Amazing.
She's not a musician,
Okay.
but I'm sort of interested.
Sure. Yeah. I've been so lucky to have amazing experiences there. I find, well, maybe in all of Europe, there's being a musician feels like more of a kind of normal thing. Like you could say, I'm a plumber, I'm a teacher, I'm a banker, I'm a musician. It's kind of more part of life, as of course, Western classical music is a European art form. Um, in the Netherlands, I also feel though that there's quite an appetite for new music,
Mm-hmm.
for 20th century art as just part of the ecosystem. One good example of that would be, I think it was 2017, and we were in a town called Heerlen, which is not a very big town, certainly not somewhere with a grand concert hall and a big upper class and a tradition of a really what you might call an erudite public. And Ellen Corver, who I mentioned, and her duo partner, Sepp Hotenhays, they performed a work by Stockhausen that's 75 minutes long with no breaks, involves non-pianistic sounds. And the audience was like in rapt attention the entire time. And they're brilliant artists. Like a huge part of that, of course, is because of them. And then like immediate standing ovation as soon as it was finished. And um, I've seen that experience. I've had that experience there as a performer that they seem to have very open ears in a lot of ways. And I've really valued those experiences.
Wonderful. Actually, sort of connected to the
Mhm.
Netherlands, there's a piece on your album of Alice's music called Shade, which I believe was inspired by a Van Gogh, very famous painting, Starry Night.
Yeah. There are a number of visual art inspirations amongst Alice's oeuvre. This one, Shade, it's quite shadowy and mysterious, and I think when I think of that very famous painting, I think of the stars, those yellowy orange tones against the kind of swirling blue. And Alice's work seems to me, it does have those kind of scintillated moments, like brightness, but it also is maybe more about the darkness of the sky from which the stars are sparkling. And it's quite almost jazzy in its harmonic palette. I don't say that because I know anything about jazz, but that's a response I've heard from
Mm-hmm.
some listeners that there's a kind of jazz sound to it. And that's the second work of a set of three. The first one is Cyclone, which is very, very fast, turbulent, and then Shade, and then Blaze is the final of the three, and they make up a work called Musical Tableau, all taken together. But then there's also Aeon, which is inspired by the famous surrealist melting clock work of Salvador Dali, and The Weeping Woman, which is inspired by Pablo Picasso's famous set of anti-war paintings, also called The Weeping Woman.
You're about to hear an excerpt of Shade from Awakened Dreaming. Yeah, it's wonderful, all the connections between the arts, and I was reading actually a book my sister had given me last night. It's ekphrastic poetry, so it's poetry inspired from visual art.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. You know, you'd mentioned Cyclone. So you grew
Hmm.
up on the prairies in Canada. You must have experienced or seen tornadoes or had that sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, like, not in the extreme way that our southern neighbors do at times, but we certainly have funnel clouds, tornadoes. The experience that would be most common, it would be in the heat of summer, and it's incredibly dry.
Mhm.
Get a prairie person talking about temperature, and they'll tell you about the dry cold and the dry heat versus the damp cold or damp heat. So the height of summer, it's been very hot, very, very dry. And then the sky, it goes incredibly still. You know, you can't even hear insects or birds, certainly no wind, and the wind is normally a kind of central part of the experience. And then the sky goes like a funny color, maybe like a kind of greeny color, and it can even go like pitch black, at 9 o'clock in the morning, pitch black. And then the storm really starts to swirl, and you can see it coming from a ways away because it's so flat, and we have that sight line. And then the clouds kind of start to take the form of this swirling tornado shape. And they do touch down, not always, and of course cause really significant destruction when they do. But you can see it and have the experience even when you're quite far away.
This is Cyclone from Awake and Dreaming. Yeah, I'm curious because you did return to Regina for
Mhm.
quite a few years after
Mhm.
having been away. And what was that like for you?
Um, it was fascinating. As you say, I left after high school and I had lived most of those years in New York City and Montreal, also a little bit in Toronto and Vancouver, and several winters spent in Banff. I mean, everywhere is always changing. I went back to Saskatchewan not with the intention of being there for a long time, but then we had COVID. We had initially moved there because it was a place that physically, geographically closest to my husband's family, as his father was going through some health challenges at the time. We wanted to be closer, and then with COVID, I was super privileged that to have an academic position open up at the university there. So we spent 5 years total, and it was really fascinating. The city has changed so much from when I was growing up, as cities are always changing. And of course, the musical ecosystem had changed in so many ways. But it was my first like real teaching experience, and I'm very, very touched, and I don't want to say proud of because it feels like kind of unfair, proprietary, but I'm very touched by the students I worked with there, and they really had a strong impact on me.
Hi, just a quick break from the episode. I wanted to let you know about some other episodes I've linked directly to this one, which I think may interest you, with pianist and musicologist Samantha Ege, composer Frank Horvat, organist Gail Archer, the Cheng Squared Duo with Brian and Sylvie Cheng, and pianist Ji-Yoon Kim. It's a joy to be able to bring these meaningful conversations to you, but this project cost me quite a bit of money and lots of time. Please support the series through either my merchandise store or on my Ko-fi page. You'll find the links in the show notes. For the merch, it features a unique design by artist Steffi Kelly, and you can browse clothes, notebooks, mugs, and more, everything printed on demand. On my Ko-fi page, you can buy me one coffee or every month. You'll also find the links to sign up for my newsletter, where you'll get access to exclusive information about upcoming guests. Finally, if you're finding this episode interesting, please text it to a friend. Thanks. What did you learn from them?
Oh my gosh, where to begin? My students there all had an incredible love for music, an incredible curiosity, and none of them had um, a good access. And for all various reasons, sometimes economic, well, all economic really, but also cultural, um, just a poverty of access, I would say. And so they had this kind of incredible curiosity and creativity and drive, and it was kind of scattered and fragmented, and because they hadn't had the opportunity to channel it where they really wanted it to go. I had the experience growing up of really amazing training. Like my teachers were phenomenal, and it was very natural for me to go away to keep training when I finished high school. And that was totally not the case for these students. Some of them had like incredibly minimal formal training. But then to see a student who, came to the audition playing maybe a RCM grade 6 or 7 level piece, and not playing it with a kind of strong competency, that then within a few years they're playing a Beethoven sonata and getting accepted to summer festivals alongside students who had had incredible training since age 5. I really learned that, the limitations on students are not real. They're whether they're self-imposed or imposed by the prejudice of a teacher, maybe known or unknown, they're illusory, and they're really it's the biggest disservice we can do as a teacher is to assume a limitation. And a lack of access doesn't need to be a kind of period at the end of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So what all the different directions those students' lives have gone, their journeys at the piano like completely blew out of the water what I would have thought was possible.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And in Toronto now, you're a professor at York University, and you're
Mm-hmm.
also teaching through the Royal Conservatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their sort of teenager program. What's it called? The Taylor?
Yeah, the Taylor Academy. Taylor Academy. I'm on maternity leave from both at the moment, but yeah, I coach chamber music at the Taylor Academy, and that's really really fun. And it's a wonderful program. They get quite a um, holistic education there, and the young people. It's so touching to me. Like now, we get a lot of stories in the news of young people, they're addicted to their phones or they have this horrible self-esteem, mental health challenges because of social media. And I believe all of that is true. It is a very hard time to be a young person. But then these young people, they take the subway after school on a Friday. Some of them leave early and they spend their whole Friday night playing chamber music with their friends and then whole day Saturday as well. And it's not only like I mean, the work ethic is beautiful, but they're really, I think, bucking the trend of a lot of the modern adolescent experience. And it's really special how the conservatory and that program led by Jeannie Chung, a really phenomenal artist and person, it's really created a beautiful place for them to explore their art.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So you're a new parent.
Hmm.
How's that going?
It's everything, as you know. It's beyond exhausting and also energizing in a new way I've never experienced. And my perception of time has completely contorted. My baby's 4 months old, and I feel like how could it have only been 4 months? It has been years since before I was pregnant. But at the same time, it's gone by so quickly, and so just living with all of these kind of new polarities of experience. But it's been really amazing.
Yeah, it really changes things.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I played a chamber music concert when my first child was 4 months and just feeling like in this fog, you know.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, take anyone, and even without a baby to care for, if you're not sleeping more than a few
Yeah.
hours a night, you're going to get in a fog, right? To say nothing of all the other demands on our minds and bodies. Yeah, I did my first performance he was 6 weeks old to
Oof.
the day, and that was, I don't know why, like that seemed to me like a good idea, but he was backstage with his dad, and I was certainly foggy, but we made it through.
Oh yeah. So I noticed you're a Tanglewood fellow
Mm,
and you did your doctorate with Gilbert Kalish. And
did.
I was a Tanglewood fellow and I
Ah,
remember my coachings with Gilbert Kalish were very memorable. Some contemporary chamber music, which was the first time I played that kind of music in a
mm,
chamber music setting, and probably my last time for many years that I did do
mm,
that because, yeah, I don't think now maybe things have changed, but certainly when I was a
mm,
student, there wasn't any expectation or encouragement to
mhm.
play music of now.
Sure, yeah. And I think that is still the case in
Mhm.
so many places. If, you know, even in a benign way, just because we have so much repertoire, like as violinists and pianists. But I love your Tanglewood alum too. Those were formative years for me. Gil was no longer teaching there when I was
Mhm.
there, but I was his student during those same years.
Okay.
And I took 5 years to do my doctorate with Gil, and I know this isn't common, but Gil teaches lessons every single week for his doctoral students. We need him, um, but it's very much a performance-oriented program. It's not research-oriented,
Mm.
like a lot of doctoral programs. We don't do comprehensive exams or write theses or anything like that. It's all performing based. And I remember my first week with Gil, he had 3 concerts on the go, and this is when he was in his late 70s. The first one was the Brahms Piano Quintet with the Emerson String Quartet, who are also faculty at Stony Brook. And so I thought, he's just a brilliant chamber musician, such a heavy, heavy work for the pianist. And then he was also playing Beethoven concertos at Cornell University. So then he's also this soloist, very personal voice in this very standard repertoire. And then he was also premiering new works of George Crumb with percussion and voice in the city. And so he's also works with singers and composers and in non-traditional chamber music setting. And that has it's such a model for me, like to be that omnivorous about the repertoire and about the art form. Yeah, I feel like I owe so much to Gil. Everything I could even say pianistically. I feel like he gave me my sound, and he really presented such an incredible model for what a life at the piano can be.
What's his teaching style like in private lessons?
So, what was so interesting is I have a tiny bit of insight into that because another pianist wanted to watch some of his teaching while I was a student there. And I remember this other pianist who was a brilliant artist, but quite a new teacher. So he wanted to learn from Gil. And Gil said to him, well, the most important thing is for me to make the students think I really like them, which sounds like, wait, what, what do you, what do you mean? Could it really be that simple? But he really felt like a family member and quite quickly too. And I know that the whole studio felt that way. And what's interesting looking back now is that was probably the only common element across all of his students because we don't sound alike and we don't sound like him. So something about like feeling honored and liked and safe like enabled each of us to kind of find our own sound and find ourselves as artists. So that's kind of the only thing about his teaching I can find as a common element.
Did he introduce interesting repertoire to you that you hadn't known about?
He did, yeah, certainly American repertoire, I would say. Like I knew of composers like Elliott Carter, but I hadn't kind of been exposed to a lot of his works. And of course, Gil had premiered so many of them. Also Charles Ives. Certainly I knew of Ives also, but I didn't, have that deep knowledge. Like Gil, for example, was one of the first interpreters of the Concord Sonata, which is this really sprawling, highly virtuosic piece. George Crumb, someone he worked with directly for many, many years. And Crumb has, of course, this very beautiful, intricate handwritten notation. And it actually is pretty clear once you get into it. But Gil could just say, oh, this is what he wants, particularly in terms of extended techniques. And again, it was a name I knew. I had heard the incredible Black Angel String Quartet, but I didn't know about this wealth of piano repertoire. And then also Gil is a very, I think, really special interpreter of Haydn and Schubert and all the kind of greatest hits, if you will, composers of piano repertoire. So really that egalitarian approach to the whole repertoire, I think, is also what I gained from him, this sense that you don't have to choose to be a Beethoven performer or a George Crumb performer or a performer of your friends, because he was also always playing music by the composition faculty at Stony Brook. And as a pianist, you do all of those things, and you ought to be able to, and you ought to want to, rather than kind of saying there's this one and this one.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, at Tanglewood, did you play in the orchestra at all, or was it strictly chamber music?
It was such a great program because we had to do everything, which was, of course, terrifying the first time. But we had to play solo, we had to play chamber, we had to play art song with singers. We also had to do some like opera reduction, and we had to play in orchestra, and we had to play in the Festival of Contemporary Music. So some of the orchestral works, I think my first year, well, I had Pines of Rome, the celesta part there, and Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet, which is quite a big piano part. Petrushka, I think that was my second year. So the repertoire, I think, was chosen so that all the, 8 or 10, however many piano fellows we were, we would have some of those really meaty standard orchestral excerpts, which is thrilling for a pianist. We don't get much experience to do that.
Yeah. I mean, we have a couple of wonderful pianists who play regularly with the National Arts Center Orchestra where I play, and it's such a different skill. I'm always curious to know, like very few pianists end up doing it because it's very specific.
Absolutely. And I think also the opportunity is really quite rare. Most orchestras don't even have like a full-time pianist. So I think freelancers might kind of fall into that as a career, but it's not really like a path one could kind of hope and intend to pursue because the opportunity might just not be there. But yeah, certainly not only playing with a conductor, obviously that is a whole separate skill set, but being able to like direct your sound from the back of the stage when you have like maybe timpani and low brass beside you or something.
Yeah.
That, or playing the other keyboard instruments like the celesta, that is a very, very kind of specific and counterintuitive way of producing sound, and to actually get the sound to speak and bloom and then do something musical with it. It is absolutely a separate additional set of skills, let's say.
And was it surprising to you to be part of so much sound the first time you did it?
That's a great question. I had played in orchestra in my undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't that I had never done it, but certainly the um, being in that specific physical location and hearing what the orchestra sounded like from there was very shocking. And then certainly it's so different, like your point of place in the orchestra from what you might hear when you listen to a recording of the piece, or
Mm-hmm.
if you were in the hall just as an audience member. And that's a huge learning curve too, that you can't actually trust your ears, because that would be too late and it would not actually be accurate to
Yeah.
what the sound is like.
Well, I wanted to ask about the physicality and ergonomics of playing.
Mm.
Certainly, if anyone's, I haven't actually, I missed your performance in Ottawa last year. I was out of town, but the videos I've seen of you playing, like really embodied way of approaching the instrument. Was that from Gil or other teachers or your own development?
Probably mostly from Gil. He is also a physically small person. I am 5 foot, almost 5'1", and so I think I believed for a long time I couldn't be a powerful player, and certainly the really virtuosic romantic repertoire, let's say, was off limits to me. Um, and that I don't know that that was just a self-imposed limitation. I think there's even within piano pedagogy, there's a lot of stereotype of, what kind of person can play what kind of repertoire. And then it was certainly with Gil and actually with a teacher named Marc Durand, who formerly professor at University of Montreal, who I worked with at some summer programs before I was working with Gil, who really helped me to understand like how sound is produced at the instrument. And it's nothing to do with force or strength at all. It's to do with speed of attack. And if you think of, I don't know, hockey, like the great players aren't necessarily the biggest ones, they might be the fastest ones, right? So there's these different ways of being virtuosic. But I mean, it really is just physics. Kinetic energy, the motion is converted into sound. And once I came to not only understand that and know that intellectually, but to understand what that meant for my playing, that totally changed everything. And so I think sometimes we look at a pianist and it looks like maybe they're moving a lot, or maybe they're not moving a lot, or they're moving in a way that looks awkward, or they're moving in a way that looks dance-like. And we really can't know exactly what's going on. We just get a kind of visual, but that point of sound, all of our motion um, is to do with the speed of attack at that point of sound. And of course, all of our bodies are different. All of our physicalities are different. So it's going to look different on different people. But that certainly is like every motion I make is to do with that speed of attack. And of course, we have many notes. It's not just ever one speed of attack. It's the process of all of them and connecting that to the sound that we want to hear, the sound we think the composer is after. And so that's kind of a process of constant discovery because each piano is different and our bodies are always changing as we get older, our sense of ourselves in a space. But yeah, all the motion really does just come down to that speed of attack.
That's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let's talk about different pianos because you've toured quite a
Sure.
bit. How do you deal with that?
My my teacher when I was a youth, she told me once, never fight the piano because it will
Mm.
always win. I was going to play in a competition in Saskatoon, and so I had to drive there. I was about 16. It's called the Lyle Guston competition, and it seemed like a very big deal to me at the time. So I had to drive there 2.5 hours and then kind of wait around and then go play my whole program, which was, I think, a Bach Prelude and Fugue, a Haydn Sonata, a Chopin Scherzo, and a contemporary piece. Well, it was Lowell Lieberman, which at the time felt very edgy to me. Um, and so no space to warm up. I'm sure I played my program before we got on the road, but then my mother and I drove out to Saskatoon. She doesn't drive, so I was driving. And in a situation like that, it's just your mind, right? You have to have all the music there, and you have to be so present in the moment. You have to experience what the instrument is capable of, try to figure that out as you go, and then that great wisdom, don't try to fight it. Don't try to force something, but discover what the instrument can do. And that's what I try to do, of course, to greater and lesser degrees of success. Certainly, we can see a lot of the class barriers in piano playing because let's imagine someone had a 9 foot Steinway from their first piano lesson. You know, when they go to compete, let's say, or audition on a 9 foot Steinway, they've always been playing with a reasonably similar palette of colors. One note, a great artist might be able to make 100 different sounds with that one note. And if you've always had that at your disposal, well, you're very familiar with that capability. Whereas if you have had an upright piano, um, like a Nordenheimer or something, not to criticize that brand, but it's, designed for a much more intimate sound. And then you suddenly have this 9 foot instrument, you're not instantly going to be able to access those 100 colors on every note. So there is certainly like a inequality, and we see that play out in the profession for sure. But the positive, I guess, is that it's always a discovery. Every concert hall, every space, you have this new friend, this new piano, and try to treat it that way.
Yeah.
Not like a new foe or
Yeah. Well, I was curious about creating performance opportunities.
Still a bit of a mystery to me. I think obviously in an ideal world, we would just be invited, right? And people would know who we are and they would want to engage us and they would understand that their listening community could connect well with us. Of course, I don't know that that's the case for anyone. There's a great story anecdotally that the great pianist Yefim Bronfman, that his family always are encouraging him to take a break, take a rest. But even at such a great stage of his career, he feels like he has to keep hustling all of the time. And so I don't know that we never really get to escape creating opportunities. And I really believe as artists, our role is not to meet a demand. Like our role is not to say, oh, I think this is what people want. I'm going to show them that that's me. But it's really to create a demand and to cultivate a demand for what we do, because I think that the hunger, the appetite for artistic experiences is everywhere. And it's more just that connecting the dots process. And I think as artists, certainly in this day and age, we have to take responsibility for that and take ownership. I think that's really hard. I don't know how to, I haven't found a formula for doing it successfully 100% of the time, but I do believe like I have to be an advocate for our art form. I think it's, the only way, at least for me. And sometimes it's easier than other times if you have good support or if you get those little breaks of luck and you have someone with more power or access helping you, or believing in you, certainly then you're not advocating alone. But I do think that is part of my responsibility to advocate for what I do. And that's where the opportunities come from.
Have you done concerts in different kinds of settings that were kind of inspiring? Not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think like the term community engagement, I don't like it because I think it's always a community, right? Regardless of the setting. And in a really traditional standard concert hall environment, that is a community, right? And I don't know what else it would be. But certainly some of the maybe less expected listening communities that I've had the privilege of performing for would include refugee resettlement homes. That was a really amazing experience I had with Carrie DeWars, one of my duo partners. She's a violinist based in Manitoba. We were on a tour with Prairie Debut touring organization, and there were two settlement homes for newly arrived refugees to the Calgary area. And we shared some music with those communities, and that was really, really powerful. Carrie herself is a descendant of refugees, first generation. And so I can't even, I won't speak to her experience, but it was extremely powerful for her. And certainly to engage with a community of people with whom we most likely would not have met in that standard concert hall environment, right? Was very special. And to be sharing music in their home, like this was their new living space, and to not kind of have the expectation that they would leave their home and seek out classical music, right? But that we were invited to where they were living, to their new home, and that we could share music there. It was very powerful. Certainly, like care homes for the elderly, that's a community. To speak broadly, that's a community with whom I've really had incredible experiences sharing music. On that same tour, actually, I think we were in High River, Alberta, and we were playing, like in many small towns, the hospital will also have a extended care hospice and retirement community all within the one building. So we were playing music for the residents who lived there, but weren't necessarily, hospital patients, but they were living at that center. And one woman who was no longer verbal, as I was playing, and it was Brahms, I think Opus 118 with these beautiful set of six pieces. And she wheeled herself up, and then she was like right next to me, and she was humming along with everything in this like beautiful, low, very resonant sound. And I don't know if that was the piano was familiar to her, or the repertoire, or the vibration on her body. Like I couldn't ask her. Well, I could, but she couldn't share with me exactly what was happening for her. But yeah, I'll have that sound in my ears until I die, I'm sure.
Mm.
So those would just be a couple, but it's always a relationship with whomever is listening, in my view.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you improvise and do you compose?
Oh, I wish and I wish. Um, I have had a number of pieces come across my music desk that say optional improvisation, and then a set of 20 bars or something. I never take the option. I have so much admiration for artists who do, and of course a great number of contemporary musicians are very much at home improvising. I feel wholly unqualified and incapable. I don't know. It's not an ego thing. It's not that I'm worried about not sounding good, but I just feel like it's not part of my practice. But I have immense admiration for it. My husband is also a pianist, and he grew up with a lot of fiddling tradition, and improvisation for him is like second nature. And I think it's really amazing what improvisers do. And composition, same story. I really bow down to composers. Um, and it's something I have never dipped my toes into, and I doubt I ever will.
Well,
I love it, I
yeah.
admire it, and it's not my wheelhouse.
You're young. I won't be surprised if you can. Well, your playing sounds very improvisatory to me. That's why I was wondering. Was a
Oh, I that really means so much to me. Thank you for saying that. Alice's notation is highly intricate and specific, but then very oftentimes, probably the majority of the time, her intended effect is actually quite free.
Mhm.
So that really means to me that I've internalized her language to
Mhm.
the extent that I can get that freedom.
And just to dig into your process a little more, I'm curious, are you
Mm.
journaling? Are you writing things down with your practicing?
Ooh, not the way I tell my students to. I write every morning 3 pages from a method called the Artist's Way
Mhm.
by Julia Cameron. Maybe you're familiar with it. I've been doing that for many years now. That often touches on my practicing of the previous day. I also like to work when it's my most efficient work. I work in 25-minute cycles, the Pomodoro technique. If anyone's familiar, it's meant to be the amount of time that the average adult brain can stay in a focused mode before needing a kind of 5 to 10 minute mind wandering diffuse mode. So I usually work that way, and then cycle through those 25 minutes, then 5 to 10 minutes off. And so sometimes within those focused sets, I actually can't hold the focus. And other times I feel like, oh, I could sustain this longer, but I know my mind enough to know it's not going to be most efficient if I try to keep going. So that would be the kind of um, when I'm doing my best work, that would be the kind of method that I employ. I don't tend to journal right away after. I probably could do with that. I often encourage my students, like right after a lesson, at least write down what your experience was. Better yet, go practice it right away so that it stays really fresh and present for you.
What do you do for those 5 to 10 minute balancing breaks? What's effective?
My understanding is that it has to be letting your mind wander. So like most ideal is meditation, just sit or lie down and don't do anything, just breathe. I don't necessarily always have the discipline for that. But certainly nothing like go on your phone or read the news, nothing like that. I tend to do some kind of physical movement, like get up from the piano, maybe go flip the laundry or get something ready for lunch. But usually I try to something that involves like no mental effort.
Yeah.
So it's an actual mind wandering time.
So to wrap this up, I thought it might be interesting to reflect a little bit on mentorship because, we did talk about Gil and how he meant so much, and you talked about his varied career. And you also have this varied career. And, what kind of things do you impart to your students? Or would you have said to 12-year-old Katherine about your future possibilities?
Wow, that's really beautiful. To my 12-year-old self, I mean, I feel like it would be pointless because she wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't, she wouldn't believe it, for sure. It would be too unbelievable. For my own students, I really actually try to not advise. I feel like they're living in a world, they're inheriting a world that I actually don't really understand anymore. It's so different, even from when I was in their stage of life. There are so many things they already know more than I do. They understand differently. I don't know that there's necessarily that much that I can offer of guidance because the lives they're going to live in this profession and outside of it, they're going to be more experts than me. But certainly when it comes to their practicing, I really want them to feel at home at the piano. I want them to feel like when they're practicing, that is for them. I want them to feel safe, nurtured, that is a really positive part of their life. If they want it, they may wish to leave it behind entirely. But I think that's probably the most powerful thing I can offer them is helping them to be at home with the instrument and to be at home in their practicing. And the other thing that I really hope they understand, it took me a really long time to understand, and I still struggle with it all the time, is that this is for you. Like this music, it's for you. I think a lot of young people, certainly myself, we see ourselves kind of outside. Like there's this profession of pianism, of Western art music. And, if we pass the litmus test, we might be granted admission by some gatekeepers. And I don't think that's entirely unfounded. But I don't think that's what the music or the instrument is all about. So to help them to embrace their artistry, embrace the repertoire, to know that it's very much for them, that there's, they don't need to wait for someone to come and say, you're now good enough to be a part of this. That even if professionally it does feel that way, the real truth and at the bones of the blood and guts of the matter is this is for all of us.
Beautiful. Thanks for that. Well, thanks so much for speaking with me today. It was really inspiring.
Oh, it was really my privilege. Thank you so much, Leah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share this with your friends and check out episodes you may have missed at leahroseman.com. If you could buy me a coffee to support this series, that would be wonderful. I'm an independent podcaster and I really do need the help of my listeners. All the links are in the show notes. The podcast theme music was written by Nick Cold. Have a wonderful week.